When the Golden State Warriors drafted Steph Curry with the 7th overall pick in 2009, they had no idea Steph would turn into the player he has become, being one of the greatest players of all time, the greatest shooter the game has ever seen, and a man who truly changed the game of basketball with his gifted ability to shoot the ball from deep. And the Warriors drafting Steph Curry was truly a franchise-altering decision that would lead to multiple championships in the future. But Steph Curry wasn't drafted number 1 overall. In fact, he was drafted pretty late when you compare it to when other all-time greats were drafted in their respective classes. So how did a player so great, so impactful to the game, that he revolutionized the sport, how was it that 6 people were drafted before him? And what came of those 6 players selected before Steph, and where are they now? If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode going forward. This is a pretty new channel, only a couple months old, so we greatly appreciate the support in helping it grow. But anyway, the 2009 draft was an interesting one because everyone was focused on the consensus number 1 pick at that time in Blake Griffin. And believe it or not, at that time, there were more people talking about Ricky Rubio than not only just Steph Curry, but also James Harden, who ended up going 3rd overall in that draft. Brandon Jennings. People were getting excited about Brandon Jennings in the 2009 draft, who was the number 1 overall recruit coming out of high school in 2008, and forego playing in college to go play overseas. So it kind of leads me into this point of why 6 players were chosen over Steph Curry was because despite the incredible success Curry had at the collegiate level, despite being the leading scorer in the NCAA, which is not an easy task by the way when you factor in the thousands of Division I athletes there are for basketball across the whole nation, a first-team All-American, all of the stuff that you would expect a great college player to be, he was balling in the NCAA tournament, but there was skepticism around his size, whether his skill and game would translate well into the NBA, and whether or not he would just be another high-volume scorer that can't play defense. So when the Warriors made that pick, there was actually a lot of critique for taking Steph that early on over guys like DeMar DeRozan and Brandon Jennings. But obviously, knowing what we know now, it was the smartest decision the Warriors franchise ever made, and a colossal mistake for all the teams that had the ability to select him beforehand. And it's funny because of these 6 players selected before Steph Curry, 3 of them are already out of the league, and only 2 of them went on to be All-Stars. So let's start with the first pick drafted before Steph, and that's Blake Griffin. Now, Blake Griffin ended up missing his whole rookie season due to injury, but then came back and won Rookie of the Year the following season, and being selected an All-Star in his rookie season. Griffin went on to be a dominant power forward in the league with his highlight reel dunks, his sheer strength and physicality to bully his way to the rim. Had some great runs with the Clippers after Chris Paul joined the team, but as we know, that team never made it over the hump. Griffin ultimately got traded to the Pistons after he wasn't producing like he used to during his younger days, and then suddenly made the All-Star team again as a Piston. You know, one thing I feel people never gave Blake enough credit for was that as he aged and lost some of his hops and athleticism, and obviously as the game also evolved over time to outside shooting, he adapted his game as such, going from most of his early years just being primarily a dunker, never shooting more than 1 3 a game, to eventually putting up over 7 threes a game, and on decent efficiency shooting 36%. His shot eventually did start to dip though. Griffin got bought out by the Pistons, played for the Nets for the last couple of seasons, and now is on a vet minimum deal playing for the Boston Celtics, and you can tell his days are really numbered in the NBA. I honestly would not be surprised if this was his last season in the league, as he is hardly in the rotation most nights for Boston, especially now that they have Robert Williams back. The next guy drafted before Curry, Hasheem Thabeet. If you're new to following the NBA, you probably don't even know who this guy is, and that's because he only played 5 seasons in the NBA, getting moved from team to team. The Grizzlies who selected Thabeet quickly realized right away that this was a mistake, and you could tell that he was never going to be a great player in the NBA. Despite his size being 7'3", an excellent rebounder and shot blocker in college, it was just a whole different ball game going up against the best centers in the world, and Thabeet simply put couldn't hold his own in the league, and as such, he was out of the league by 2014. Thabeet bounced around in the G League for a while, then called the D League, until he was cut by the Fort Wayne Mad Ants in 2020. Thabeet then signed with the Taiwanese P League Plus team for 1 season before he was ultimately let go from that team, and more recently, he's been playing for a local team in his home country of Tanzania, where he actually led his team to the championship and even won the finals MVP in that run. But anyway, Thabeet, for all intents and purposes, was a bust when you think about how high he went in the draft and was barely playable once he got into the NBA. The next guy drafted before Steph, I mean, you all know who this is, James Harden. I don't really have to go into the specifics of where he is now. Obviously, started his career out in Oklahoma City, playing with Kevin Durant and Russ. Got moved to the Rockets because he wanted more money than the Thunder were willing to give him. Breaks out and becomes the superstar that we all know. MVP winner, multiple scoring titles, multiple All-Star and All-NBA selections. And you now know James Harden plays for the Philadelphia 76ers, although unlike Steph, he started to decline in his later years, as we have seen from him more recently. Still a great player, but not a top 10 player in the league anymore. The next guy drafted before Steph, selected 4th overall by the Kings, Tyreke Evans. And oddly enough, Tyreke actually looked like he was going to be a franchise player that the Kings were so desperately in need of after botching so many lottery picks over the years, which they still continue to do. But Tyreke, in his rookie season, was able to put up over 25-5 on good efficiency, was something that no other rookie had been able to do since LeBron James. And then all of a sudden, the dude just started falling off, getting worse season after season. And once he got suspended for violating the league's drug policies, like, this is one of the rare cases where a player peaks in his rookie season and just keeps declining thereafter. Michael Carter-Williams is another example. But Tyreke Evans, again, won Rookie of the Year, and that's about all he did. He did have somewhat of a resurgence when he was with the Grizzlies back in 2018 when he averaged over 19 points per game, but then had one more season with the Pacers, and that was his last in the NBA because of the fact that he violated the anti-drug program and wasn't reinstated until just this past year in 2022. But having been away from the game for that long, now in his 30s, it's unlikely we'll ever see him suit up in the NBA again. Then the next two players drafted before Steph Curry, and what makes the tragic story of the Minnesota Timberwolves as a franchise that much more painful is that the Wolves had both picks, 5 and 6, in that draft, and instead of taking Steph, they drafted two other point guards over Curry. Ricky Rubio at number 5 and Johnny Flynn at number 6. Poor Johnny Flynn will always be remembered as the player who was selected right before Steph Curry. Kind of like Sam Bowie being drafted right before Michael Jordan, or even more recently Marvin Bagley being drafted right before Luka Doncic. And really, Johnny Flynn, while yes, a busted pick, it's not like it was just him that went before Curry. There were a lot of teams who passed on Steph. And to Flynn's credit, he was a high-level recruit coming out of high school, a really, really good college basketball player, and he actually had a decent rookie season for the Wolves, but then he got injured. Was drafted in 2009 and then already out of the league by 2012. Didn't even make it to the end of his rookie contract. Flynn played overseas in Australia, China, and Italy, and again, injuries caught up with the guy to where he wasn't even able to remain healthy in those professional leagues. And by 2015, his basketball playing days were over. In just a matter of 6 years, going from a lottery pick to never playing basketball again. And where's Johnny Flynn now, you might ask? He actually went back to school and received his MBA, currently working in business and hoping one day he comes back to the league in a front office role. And then I guess I probably should have started with Ricky Rubio since he was actually drafted before Flynn, but as I'm sure most of you know, Ricky Rubio is still in the NBA. He's had a lot of issues with injuries over the course of his career. He's currently with the Cleveland Cavaliers, but has yet to play so far this season. And Rubio has actually been a solid point guard in the NBA when healthy. Definitely not a franchise level player. I think a lot of international scouts thought that he would be. A lot of it because Rubio really started standing out at such a young age of 15, 16, playing professional basketball in Spain. He's a great passer, great defender, an okay scorer, just not the best shooter. But again, like the rest of these guys drafted 1 through 6, nowhere near on the same level of greatness as Steph Curry, who still continues to dominate to this day, even when you think he's finally going to start declining, being in his mid-30s now. The other thing that is fun to think about here is what Curry's career would have looked like had he been drafted to one of those other teams that had the ability to select him. I think we can all agree we would never want to see Curry in a Kings uniform where great players waste their primes away. Seeing him on the Clippers would have been fun had they been able to develop around him. The Grizzlies, I mean, at that time, they were horrible at player development, so not a destination you would want to have seen Curry go to. The Timberwolves, I mean, yet again, another team like the Kings that has not been competent at the top, nor a good focus on building around franchise players. But the Thunder, though, drafting Curry instead of James Harden and seeing the young rise of Curry, Westbrook, and Kevin Durant, that would have been something, even though the fit with Westbrook and Curry likely wouldn't have been the best, but it would have been incredible to see all of those young talents on the same roster. But let me know what you guys think. Where would you have wanted to see Curry be drafted if he had gone before number 7? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.